Hello, this is Diva Brown from Simply Magazine, the audiobook and ebook people. We're here today to talk about cost savings. Most of us as entrepreneurs think about the big sale. But the point about the big sale is it's only good if you can make money on it. That seems to be a truism, but many people overlook it. The number one cost for most goods and services is transportation. This is something people don't think about. It's been said in manufacturing that 70% of the cost is transportation. And that's not merely freight in and freight out. It's also moving freight around the factory, from someone's hand to the assembly point, into inspection and so forth. So, if transportation is 70% of the cost, it certainly is worthy of great consideration. And one of the things about the economy that's very important in America is there have been 12 major innovations since the founding of the country. And people don't look at it that way often. They look at inventions as the fancy ones, like the electric light bulb and things like that. They overlook some of the basics, and let's talk about what the 12 are. The first one was the post office. All of a sudden, you could mail a letter from Philadelphia to Boston for a very low price. Ben Franklin did that. Ben Franklin thought it was a greater invention than getting lightning for electricity. Perhaps it was, perhaps it wasn't, but it shows the importance he put into that. The second one was the Erie Canal. And what's interesting about that is Peter Bernstein has written a great book on the subject. It's called Wetting the Waters, and it's about the Erie Canal that went from New York City to Buffalo and Lake Erie. And it's been said the Great Lakes are the American Mediterranean. Everything moved west from there, people, wheat, everything. One reason New York became so important, and people overlook this, Philadelphia and Boston were bigger cities up until about the time of the Erie Canal. It was the Erie Canal that made New York the hub. The book to read is Peter Bernstein. Wonderful book on the subject. The next one was the railroad. And to tell you what the railroad was, it's very much like the internet of today. All of a sudden, wheat and people could be moved for a fraction of the price of before. Also, it was easier. You didn't have to go through all of the dirt and difficulty of stages and horses and walking and all the rest of it. Then, at that point, the next major one were cars and trucks. And we take cars and trucks for granted, but until Henry Ford came along and made the car for everyone, people didn't use cars. It wasn't part of what people did. Now, Henry Ford had a second thing beside the cheap car. He also did the assembly line. It's interesting. In Adam Smith, he refers to the assembly line of making a pin, which each person doing a separate thing. But it really was Ford that put it into the mainstream of production to come up with this $500 car. What an accomplishment that was. Then we had planes. That's kind of obvious. You could suddenly go from New York to Chicago easily, not 2 days, on a train. And following that were phones, faxes, and I would add cell phones, though they came a little bit later. So all of a sudden, we were calling people and faxing things as opposed to having to go there. We could actually talk to people. And it was an amazing innovation. One that's often overlooked are containers for shipping. When I first shipped goods, you did it in odd lots. You could never be sure it was all to arrive. There was a lot of theft along the way. Once containers came along, everything was smooth. The containers were loaded on the ship easily and automatically. They were taken off the ship easily and automatically. A much undervalued innovation in terms of cost. Then we have a common modern problem talking about pipelines. Well, we have over 100,000 pipelines in the United States. We're talking about one from Keystone down to Texas, but we have hundreds of thousands to houses and everything else. A huge saving versus propane tanks, which are not only expensive but dangerous, and all the things that go with it. Another thing that's overlooked is the interstate highway. Eisenhower put that in the 50s and tied the whole country together. So all of a sudden, America became more mobile, and this contributed to Holiday Inn, McDonald, and drawing the country together commercially. It wasn't such a big deal anymore to go to California or Texas or New England. You could get anywhere in 50 to 60 hours on these roads. Now, in comparison, France didn't have highways of this kind until the last 10 or 15 years, and Russia still doesn't have a good highway between St. Petersburg and Moscow. This was an incredible accomplishment. Then we had FedEx, UPS, and the post office coming online. All of a sudden you could send documents physically without having to go there. You wouldn't have to have a courier and all that went with that. And finally we have the internet that we know so well, which is just evolving now. We deliver products that way, we send PDFs so we don't travel, and all the rest of it. So when you think of innovation, don't overlook transportation. It's a worthwhile subject and one you should go into. See us at staples.com, tigerdirect.com, audible.com, which is iTunes, and our own site, simplymagazine.com. Thank you from Simply.